Welcome to All Right in Sin City, a podcast about writers and writing in the Windsor, Detroit region. Your podcasters today are
Irene Moore Davis, author, educator, and local historian.
Kim Conklin, Windsor-based writer and filmmaker.
and me, Sarah Jarvis, former bookseller, publishing rep, and literary festival chair.
All Right in Sin City moves around a lot, usually in the wee hours with a U-Haul and someone assigned to be the lookout. In seriousness, the technology available to us makes it possible to record the podcast in a whole host of locations. So you can look for us at a book festival, a watering hole, an eatery, a wading pool, a yoga studio, or a cemetery near you. As an example, this episode is being recorded in the cozy library at All Saints Church in downtown Windsor. It has the advantage of being quiet, intimate, and full of actual books.
Yes, and it's a lovely place to take the show, and it's got a lot of great vibe. So one of the things we wanted to talk about today is, just to get started, is what kind of genres do we usually read? Does one genre play into how we read a different one, or how do they intersect? How do we choose our types of books that we read?
Well, I'm going to start with my guilty secret is I love to read mysteries, and I like the British police procedurals or sometimes historical mysteries, and there's always been that debate about whether mysteries are real literature or not, and they've always been segregated into their own spots in a bookshop. But some of it is fantastic writing. If you think about P.D. James or the early stuff, Dorothy L. Sayers, and bringing in a whole lot of interesting liturgical, cultural influences, and so you can dig quite deep. And then my other one that everybody is going nuts over, and now everybody's on the bandwagon, is the series by Diana Gabaldon called the Outlander series. And Diana Gabaldon has a PhD in marine biology and was a professor for a long time, an early adopter of CompuServe. So to practice writing, to bring herself from nonfiction to fiction, she started writing little bits, little scenes that came to her head while she was nursing children in the wee hours and watching early episodes of Doctor Who. And she started, playing with fiction on this CompuServe forum, and everyone went nuts over it. And now we've got best-selling novels and strong, witty female characters, very clever medical background. So all of that, I think, is an interesting way that genres can connect with the writer and the readers. And, I try and read literary fiction as well, but I do love a little bit of all of that. Irene?
I really love to read literary fiction above all. I mean, one of my favorite things to read in particular is 18th and 19th century literature, and I find that a lot of that has an impact on how I write history in the present day. And I also just love to read fiction of almost any kind. Poetry is another favorite for sure. I find that poetry helps me a lot in terms of my own writing in concentrating on the impact that a particular sentence can have and really distilling long and winding sentences into something that is short and has a lot of punch to it. So those are great things to read. I've never really gotten into the Outlander kind of stuff, but I'm sure I will find time for that eventually.
You'd need a lot of time, but that's okay.
So we'll shoot for retirement then.
There you go.
I am actually a big fan of Outlander and Game of Thrones and all of that stuff. I do. I like fantasy. I like historical fiction, and Diana does both. And I also like, obviously I love literature. I'm more of a recent convert to reading a lot of poetry. I've always read some, but it's only lately that I've been hanging out with the right people that have been pointing me to the right things, that I've really enjoyed it more. So in my perspective, I think there's just good writing and bad writing. And it all comes down to the voice in your ability to tell a decent story. And whatever genre you're in, I mean, literary, if you think about it, is a genre too. It's a type, you know? So, yes, I know it's held in a different regard by some people, and it should be, because it's harder in some ways. But I think it's also pretty hard to keep people engaged for a long time, and no matter how you do that, that's a good thing. So,
yeah, variety is a great thing. Mm-hmm. Well, I have the pleasure of introducing our first guest today. Essex County native Van Waffle drops by from his home in Waterloo to talk about his writing. And later in this show, author Brittni Brinn will also stop by to talk to us about genre writing. And now we're in our mobile studio, independently sharing our stories through Buzzsprout and other outlets. Van Waffle is a Canadian journalist, naturalist, poet, photographer, and weaver. He graduated from the University of Guelph with an honors Bachelor of Science in Wildlife Biology and a minor in ecology. He obtained a diploma in journalism from Conestoga College. Van has worked as a magazine writer, newspaper reporter, and public relations writer. With other careers in between, in 2012, Van resumed freelance writing full-time. Recently, he's written for Edible Toronto, Gluten-Free Living, Birdwatching, and CottageLife.com. He lives and works in Waterloo, Ontario, with his partner and fellow fabric artist Danny. And full disclosure, Van and Sarah have been friends since grade 5. So I'm going to start off, Van. You mentioned earlier that you place a difference on writing for money versus writing for love. Would you like to give us a quick overview of your freelance writing to start off? And then we'll talk to you about your writing for love.
Okay, sure. I write regularly for a magazine called Gluten-Free Living, which is based in the U.S., and I'm their research editor. My specialty is research, medical research on celiac disease and other gluten-related disorders. And I've been writing regularly for them since about 2012. And one thing that I find, I rub shoulders with a lot of other professional writers, freelance writers. I'm a member of the Professional Writers Association of Canada, and there's a really wonderful chapter in Guelph where I lived for many years, and it's close enough that I've stayed connected with them. And it gives us sort of a water cooler to go to once a month for our meetings, because we all work from home pretty much. But the thing that often comes up for us is that freelance writers need sort of the 90% that they write for income and the 10% that they write for love. Now, I would say that probably the 90% that is my income is actually what a lot of writers would say is their love, because I do love that kind of work as a journalist and using my biology background to be able to inform my interviews with experts on celiac and so on. But what I really have a passion for is writing personal essays, fiction, and poetry. And I have found that it's important for me to sort of give priority to that in my life over time, because that's what drives me. And if I don't make time and space for that, the other part, though I really enjoy it, will start to feel a little bit empty at times. Mm-hmm.
I understand that struggle completely. I do both as well. So yeah, I totally get it. So what kinds of topics do you like to write about for love?
Well, at this time, I'm working on what would be my first novel, and it's somewhat autobiographical. It's a very difficult story to write. I came out as a gay man when I was 31, but before that, I was an evangelical Christian and was involved in the ex-gay movement in conversion therapy, and it was very destructive, really, on my psyche and on my soul. And the novel that I've been working on for a while is somewhat autobiographical in that it's about an evangelical Christian gay man coming out, but otherwise completely fictional.
I have to ask, were you aware that you were a gay man when you were doing that?
Yes, I've known since I was in high school, but I spent many years running away from myself. And I realized that I was not going to survive unless I turned around and faced it and embraced who I am.
I think that's a completely human struggle.
Mhm.
Yeah, very brave.
I think many people have to deal with that, even if it isn't to do with their sexual orientation necessarily. It's we need to know who we are and to value that and not to be ashamed of it.
Wow. Can you tell us a bit about your blog, Speed River Journal?
Yeah. Well, I majored in wildlife biology and minored in ecology. That was the part of me that was running away from the writer. Although I do love to be outdoors. I love nature. And as a writer, I've come to be happy that I have not only an experience of nature, but a lot of knowledge as well that can inform the stories that I tell. And I really like to do photography and come back with images to support stories that I want to tell. And that tends to be what my blog focuses on, about stories about my walks and my reflections in the woods. And I was originally writing about Speed River Journal. I gave it that title when I lived in Guelph. Where I live in Waterloo, I'm not close to a big river. Water has always been a really important theme for me. Sarah and I grew up in Harrow. I actually grew up right on Lake Erie, and so water for me is my element. And at this time, I live close to a very small drainage ditch along the side of a woods called Cedar Creek, but I decided to stick with Speed River because it has a little bit more of a geographical location within Ontario, the province that I live in and love. So,
And I highly recommend the photos. The photos and the descriptions are just poetry in themselves.
thank you, Sarah.
Yeah. So how does this all work into your writing day, and how do you set your priorities?
Yeah, good question. For me, I'd like to give credit to a writer, Carol Lloyd, who wrote a book, Creating a Life Worth Living, that is one that I've referred back to over the years, and she talks about ecstatic task, something that creative people need to have as really part of their sort of waking up, starting a new day. And I have to say that I've really struggled with that through my life as I've tried to establish a routine that is meaningful for me. But at this point, it's become very important for me to wake up, shower, breakfast, and go for a walk. And without that walk and spending time in the woods, I feel a little bit discombobulated through the day. And then I'm a bit of a night owl, so I'm usually getting up about 8:30, and by about 11 o'clock I like to be at my desk and writing creatively. And I have been trying to make it a priority to actually focus on the novel at that point. That is my driving purpose in life at this particular stage, in this particular phase. I find that at one point I was sort of making it my reward later in the afternoon, but I found when I would finish doing my writing assignments for pay, if I tried to write around 5 o'clock, I would be tired and I'd put it off. I said, I can write after dinner, and then after dinner I wouldn't want to. Now the thing is, if I have an assignment that's due in 10 days, I'm going to work on that whether I'm tired or not. I'm going to get it done because I'm conscientious that way. Whereas with this creative work, there's nothing motivating me but my own inspiration and my own inner energy. And so it's really important to give that priority. So I've been trying to write from about 11 till 1 in the middle of the day, then take a break for lunch, and then my work for pay is after that. And I find that I do that whether I'm tired or not, and that's fine. And it doesn't take the same kind of enthusiasm. And this novel that I'm working on is not easygoing. It's not fun. I shouldn't say that. It can be fun, but it's not necessarily a happy fun. There's certainly whimsy. That's an important element for me, and for there to be a sense of some magic, something a little bit beyond reality, I suppose. Some room for a bit of craziness. So it is fun in a way, but it's also hard work. And I find that once I've spent a couple of hours on my heart work, then the rest of the day I can sort of relax, and I feel that I've accomplished something for me, and I can move on to things that I contribute to the world and to my community as well.
Do you think maybe it takes a different kind of energy to work on the creative stuff that's for you alone too, and that's part of why it needs to get done first?
Yes. I would say that the work that I do for pay takes more concentration. So I have to be relaxed. And I have to be able to focus. I would say that my creative work takes more energy, and I have to be open. I have to be fresher. I have to be open-minded for whatever comes up.
Would you like to read for us?
I would.
Okay. Can you just give us a little setup about what you're going to read? You're going to read from your novel, right?
Yes. This is potentially the opening scene of my novel. Chapter 1. A sanguine guide once told me, "Keep driving right through the forest. Don't stop. At the other side, you will reach a country where all the rules are different." She was carrying a backpack along the highway in pouring rain, and I had stopped to offer a ride. It was ridiculous because 3 passengers already filled the seats of the Jeep. This happened in a dream. "Go, just go," she cried, gesticulating wildly as if the rain were my fault. The passenger in the front seat was one of those shadow figures I get, who contribute somehow to the dream story without showing who they are. And sometimes I can figure out their identities if I write it all down. Directly behind me was someone I could never see clearly, but her voice was familiar. So were her eyes in the rearview mirror. The third passenger I could see clearly over my shoulder. He was Satan, smartly dressed in a light gray suit and red tie. That tie was the only brightly colored thing in the dream. His hair was slicked back like an oil spill. He was slim and handsome, with a protuberance on each temple, not exactly horns. "Do you believe in me?" he asked. "Of course I do." He rolled his eyes. He didn't want me to believe in him. The road led into a jungle, like the hitchhiker had said, so I kept going. The devil didn't cause any trouble on the journey. Having him there just made it more exciting. I'd be afraid to tell some people about this. They might think it proves I'm an unrepentant sinner. The darkest things hang around the corners of dreams, even if you're a good person. I suppose real life is like that too, except in dreams we can see them. The trip took a long time, and we had other adventures I don't remember. I was wearing a camouflage uniform. We were like the gorillas in The Gods Must Be Crazy. Once we saw a jet crash down a hillside. It was the flight we had taken together in a previous dream. But I remembered, after the crash, we crawled out of the wreckage onto a snow-covered mountain, not this jungle. I wondered, so how did we get from the mountain to here? "Do you remember the accident now?" asks the guy with the horns. "It wasn't an accident, I remember. Terrorists blew up the plane." "Not that accident," he replies. I notice that I'm on fire. "I'm glad you're not afraid of me," he says. "I worried you would be. My body is burning." And I do remember, something leapt in front of the car. It wasn't a dream. Fire, I'm on fire. Flames on the inside, like getting locked out of the hotel room on our honeymoon. Like when my father insulted me and I wanted to hit him, but walked away burning. Like being alone at night in the apartment with no way back and no one to hold me. Am I in hell? Without the saving blood of Jesus, everyone goes to hell. I put my faith in Jesus a few years ago. God helped me, and then I let him down. But Jesus' sacrifice was once and forever because he was perfect. He was enough to cover it all, no matter how much we screw up. God, it's hot.
Thank you. Thank you very much.
You're welcome. Thanks for giving me an opportunity to read it.
Yeah.
Look forward to seeing it come out.
I hope so.
Thank you, Van,
You're
for
welcome.
coming to join us and sharing your stories.
You're
It's
welcome.
great. And welcome home again.
Yes. It's always a pleasure to be in Windsor and Essex County. I love it here.
Brittni Brinn was born Brittni Ann Carey in Winnipeg, Manitoba. She studied English and drama at Concordia University College of Alberta, now Concordia University of Edmonton, before moving to Windsor, Ontario for graduate studies. She received her MA in creative writing in 2015. She co-hosts Hardcover, a literary podcast, and writes for Paper Knife Theatre. Besides books, her interests include coffee, songwriting, and cyborgs. Welcome, Brittni Brinn.
Thank you so much.
How did you choose your genre and what drew you to it?
So I write post-apocalyptic dystopian fiction with a kind of surreal twist occasionally, and I think it was just from reading a lot when I was young and then discovering authors who wrote about kind of these weird places, and like A Canticle for Leibowitz came to me at a really pivotal point in my writing life, and it's a story about a post-nuclear society where there's kind of these monks who have scientific knowledge that they keep, and they have blueprints of all these technologies from the 50s to 80s, and they consider them like their holy work. And I always thought that was really interesting, that relationship between science and religion, but also the relationship between this post-apocalyptic environment and also the interest in preserving knowledge. So that book kind of got me thinking about, like, what would we preserve if the world ended tomorrow? Like, what would we remember and what would we carry over? So, yeah, that's probably where that started.
What would you personally preserve if the world were ending tomorrow?
Oh, wow. I would hope some books and music and plays, just like a collection of things. I don't know of anything specific, because how can you say something's more valuable than something else, right? It all kind of works together. So I don't know. I'd probably just try to grab as much as I could and like run and then go through it later. And yeah.
What drew you to genre fiction rather than literary fiction?
Well, as an English student, I was very much involved in literary fiction, and that's what I studied, and that's what I wanted to write. And I went to a creative writing class in my undergrad, and one of the students who was writing quote-unquote commercial fiction was like, wow, you're writing the good stuff, like you're writing the literary stuff. And I'm like, but your stuff is so much more interesting to me. And I felt that as I went through school and as I moved here, I just found that genre fiction had a lot more to say to me personally about the world that we're living in now. And it's more comfortable for me to write. So,
Why do you think it says more about the world that we're living in now? Something about tension, or?
yeah, I think, especially with post-apocalyptic fiction, just because of the society we're in, where the environment is constantly on our minds, like with the plastic straw thing. We're thinking about how our choices are impacting the environment, and there's a sense of kind of impending doom a little bit. And so I feel like the post-apocalyptic genre is us trying to find a way maybe out of that impending doom. And so, yeah, I don't know. I find it just really timely, and it speaks to me personally. And I do still read a lot of literary fiction, but I find that in genre fiction I can explore those kind of bigger ideas better.
Interesting. Yeah, that's what they said about March for Our Lives, the group from the Marjorie Stoneham School in Florida, who are trying to get gun control going. Excuse me. You know, this is the generation. They said we're the generation raised on Harry Potter and woman with crossbow.
The Hunger
Help me.
Games.
Thank you, Irene. Yeah. What do you think we're going to do when we're presented with this crisis? We're going to, act on it.
Right.
So speaking of that kind of strong character, do you start with your characters or do you create the world first and then populate it? How do you go about with your fiction?
I like to start with a character in mind and then kind of go through the world with them, and as they learn things or as they encounter things, having to build that for myself, because maybe they'll see something and then I'll think, oh, I don't understand how this fits in, and then I'll have to kind of work it around. But I do also write a lot with atmosphere in mind and things like light and tone and like tension in relationships, and for me that's more of what the setting becomes. It comes from the character more than the other way around, I think.
As you've mentioned, your genre works so much with ideas. How do you balance the ideas behind the story with the storytelling?
That's a good question. I find that sometimes when I write, I lose sight of the story because I'm trying to be a writer. And again, it's probably my background in English literature where I say, oh, like, what am I supposed to do here? What am I supposed to sound like here? And then having to kind of bring myself out of that and think, where's this coming from a little bit? Yeah.
How do you think your English literature background has helped you in your genre fiction writing?
Oh, it's helped so much. Just giving an idea of how characters and plot and story and setting all work together, and it's given me a critical perspective of my own writing that I think is really valuable. So, yeah, I value it a lot. And also just relationships with people who I met in my program and ways that we have influenced each other and gone through workshops together and that kind of thing. So I think that all of those elements have helped me become the writer I am now. So,
Are you in a writing group now?
I am, yeah. We just started recently. There's 4 of us currently, 5 of us. And yeah, we just kind of bring 10 pages every couple weeks and go through them together, and it's been really helpful. So,
Does everybody contribute to the same amount, or do you find that one person does more than others, or is it all pretty equitable?
depends on whose submission we're reading, because we have poets and fiction writers. Some people are doing short fiction. So when I find personally that when it's poetry, I don't have as much to contribute, because even though I've read a lot of poetry, I'm not 100% sure of like where things are at currently. And I'm writing genre fiction, so sometimes people don't have as much to say about that. So it's all, I think everybody's willing to contribute an equal amount. Yeah, depending on.
So that it's a little bit like a writing workshop in an MFA program,
Yeah.
which keeps you accountable and then also gives you some feedback, right? I mean,
Yeah,
that's-
100%. Yeah,
Okay.
that's the model we're using. So yeah.
Is everybody in the group pretty well working on the same kinds of things, or?
I think everybody's working towards either a collection or kind of an overarching work. So then that's interesting, because everything we submit builds on what we submitted last time. So there's this continuity that's building up, and it was really interesting to see too. So yeah.
And see how everything develops and changes and comes to fruition. That's cool.
Yeah.
So you also write plays.
Yes.
What kind of plays do you write?
The last major play I wrote was a family drama called Runaway, about a family who the father is developing dementia, and so there's an element of realism because we're looking at the family dynamic, but also an element of the surreal because we go into his memories and how he's trying to deal with not being able to recall certain things. So that was one that I did in 2017, and I think it was...
And you staged it?
we did, yeah, as part of the Windsor Writer Series
Oh, wow.
at Mackenzie Hall. So
Fantastic.
yeah.
That's great.
What are you working on now?
I'm working on a novel. I received the Arts, Culture, and Heritage Fund grant for
Congrats.
this year. Oh, thanks. And it was to develop a novel about body and gender, so that's what I'm working on right now. I can tell you that it's speculative fiction, so it's a little bit of science fiction, a little bit of genre fiction. Again, kind of a surreal element that I enjoy. Yeah, and it takes place in a city that's similar to Windsor. Yeah, that's...
Do you share characters between books? Like, do you take a character for one book? It doesn't necessarily have to be a sequel, and then bring it to another book, or do you start fresh?
I try to start fresh with each world that I work on. Maybe the same types of characters show up because I enjoy writing them. But yeah, I try to keep each character in their own kind of universe. Yeah, maybe one day there will be a crossover. Who knows? Yeah.
That's great. And we have a clip of you reading live, and we're just wondering if you wouldn't mind setting it up for us.
Sure. So the reading is from The Patch Project, which is a novella I wrote and was published by Edge Science Fiction and Fantasy Publishing. And in this book, it's a post-apocalyptic book, so most of the world has disappeared and literally disappeared off the face of the planet. And there are some people who have survived, and they have kind of strange powers that have developed out of this event. So in the reading, I look at a couple of the characters and how they're interacting with this new understanding of their world, but also of themselves.
Great. Thank you very much for coming to see us.
Thank you so much. This was really
Great
nice.
to have you.
Yeah.
And now we'll hear Brittni Brinn reading from The Patch Project.
All right. So, dreams. Upstairs, the blinds were all closed. May turned slowly, glancing past the door frames into dark rooms, the walls blank. Her painting at the top of the stairs was missing. She started to back down from the doors, crowding inward, but her foot hit the air, and she felt a sickening falling feeling in her stomach. Right. The stairs had collapsed. She grasped the walls on either side of her, keeping herself from falling as Isaac had, onto the jagged floorboards sticking up from below. How had she gotten here? It felt like the middle of the night with the dim shapes and the distorted perspective. Sometimes at night, she had looked to the window, watching the window frame bend and expand, but somehow never break, car headlights gleaming across the ceiling. There are no more cars, she told herself, turning down the hall and entering what used to be their bedroom. It was above the living room, their queen-size bed situated in the center, surrounded by bookcases, an easy chair, a scattering of open books, and an overturned basket of laundry. She drew close to the bed, a crawling sensation starting at the base of her neck and running up into her hairline. Suddenly, she didn't want to see what was lying there, in a twisted, shadowy, and human-looking pile. Her hands reached out on their own, pulling back strips of rags and old clothes, until before her was a tiny face mounted on a tiny body. It opened its eyes and whispered something, but she didn't hear it. She was screaming and covering her ears and throwing her clothes back on top of it. "You're dead," she told it, shaking her head and trying to run. But her legs were gone. She was lying on top of a mound with a paint stick through her heart, watching a wave slam their house into kindling sticks. Isaac wavered in and out of her vision. "I have to go," was all he said, pulling tenderly at her hair. She caught a scent of something, soap and cherry blossoms. She opened her eyes again and found herself in front of a monumental coil with electrical wires flinging out of it in all directions, pulled power lines that led off into the barren landscape, some Wing off into space. The buzz, crackle, hum of the generator was close to deafening. She ran along the chain-link fence built around it thinking, "How do I turn it off? How do I turn it off?" She sensed someone running after her. "Ed?" She stopped, turning around. A man dressed in a navy pinstripe suit stood before her, his face a dialing pad. "Dolly?" "Ha ha ha," he beeped. He was spelling something to her, but it was too fast. "Slow down," she begged. "I don't understand. We have to find Isaac," she told the telephone man. "He's looking for the books he lost." It all made sense to her now. They would go to the library, and he would be there, in his fraying tweed coat that was too old for him. They walked for hours before May remembered that the library and everything else was gone. "Who are all those people?" she asked. The Dalian pointed towards them as if to say, "Keep looking." They were monstrous in size proportion. They carried in their hands fire and cans of paint, looking for holes in the sky that sucked up the dry ground and splintered light into pixels. They reached up to fit the holes back together and weld them shut, sealing them with a white layer from their brushes and rollers. But then they began arguing, yelling in every language, loudly, louder. One hit another. They forgot their cans and handfuls of fire, dropping them. The cans and fire fell, all catching alight before hitting the ground in a catastrophic crash that bleached everything white. The sky, the giants who had frozen as statues, Everything except May and the Dalian, who stood alone on top of the hill, surrounded by bones that had been bleached by 1,000 years. May sat up. Isaac lay on her right, face turned toward her, his thin shoulders sticking up at odd angles. Her senses were strangely acute, her pulse rapid. She could feel it pounding in her ears. What kind of nightmare was that? She didn't want to delve into symbols, not now when horror pumped vinegar through her insides. Isaac might find it interesting in the morning. She lay back, adjusting her head to rest more comfortably on the flattened pillow. Sleep did not return. Images of the undead child and the generator leaped up into her mind. She shook her head, telling herself it was only a dream. They weren't eating enough, that was the reason. Her brain was starting to short-circuit. That in itself was frightening. She half wished everything was over, so she didn't have to feel so sad. She turned onto her stomach, wrapping her arms around herself, closing her eyes. The wave hit the house again and again and again as she forced herself into sleep. Isaac, she said the next morning, as she poured the last of their tea into a tiny clay mug. You're right. It's time to leave. Thank you.
Thanks for joining us. Look for more episodes of All Right in Sin City wherever you listen to podcasts, or check out our website, allrightinsincity.com. For information and announcements of new podcasts, sign up to our email list or follow us on Facebook and Twitter.